SGA, get the ball, do work, clear it out, do what you do. You wore the mustard colored sneakers.
This was the worst All-Star game of all time is a phrase that I see myself repeating year after year after year. So, what happened to the game I love? I watched the last 3 decades of All-Star games to discover what exact moment this event fell off. The 1990s was what I'd like to call the golden era of All-Star games. All of the most viewed All-Star games in NBA history came from the 90s. It had everything you'd see in a real game. Defense, screens, contested shots, blocks, fouls, impressive shooting, highlight dunks, high-flying highlights, and a super engaged crowd. This felt like a crowd of a real game. And as a result of all of those things, it felt like a real event that actually mattered. Even though they weren't focusing on generating highlights, these were all the best players in the world assembled in one place. So naturally, there were still entertaining highlights taking place. Shaquille O'Neal, someone who many argue is the most dominant interior force in the history of basketball, was 2 for 12 in the 1994 All-Star game. One thing that I noticed from watching the 90s and early 2000s All-Star games is that a lot of the best players in the league were either two-way players or even more known for their defense than their offense. So it made sense that in an All-Star game, we were seeing a lot of contested plays, defensive highlights. As we entered into the early 2000s, it became showtime. Despite maintaining levels of competitiveness, the All-Star game became more centered around highlight plays, flashy dunks, and this is where, in my opinion, the best and most iconic All-Star highlights and moments came from. 2001 was a game that many argue to be the best All-Star game of all time, with Allen Iverson leading the East in a 20-point comeback. A lot of the best offensive players of this era operated in the mid-range or at the rim, which again naturally led to more contested plays than you see now. But as the defensive intensity in this era dropped, the number of flashy non-game-like plays rose. The same Shaq that was going 2 for 12 10 years ago, he's now going between the legs, throwing lob passes, taking threes, shooting one-handed free throws. The All-Star game is now starting to turn into more of an entertainment show, which the fans at the time had no problem with as they were entertained. However, 2007 to 2008 saw the turning point. It kind of stopped looking like a basketball game. There were just back-to-back transition dunks, no defense, not even a single phase of defense being played. A common theme in all of these less competitive games of the time is that once it reached the fourth quarter, if the game was close, you would see the intensity pick up. Thankfully, from 2009 to 2012, we saw a renaissance. An injection of new, young, exciting, fresh stars gave the game some newfound energy. Games from this era having contested plays and legitimately competitive end-of-game scenarios. But then, from 2013 to 2017, we saw the demise of East versus West, as the game returned to how it was back in the mid-2000s. No transition defense, a record number of threes attempted year after year, and essentially the game turned into layup lines. You had exceptions to the rule like Russell Westbrook and Giannis Antetokounmpo, who would always play hard throughout these games, but for the most part, it was a shoot-around, which is why 2014, 15, 16, and 17 were all the highest scoring All-Star games at that time, increasing each year. So a change had to be made, and it was made. In 2018, we saw a shift to a playground-style format, and this initially had its successes. I would argue that the 2018 All-Star game was the most competitive game since 2012. There was more effort on display, more competitiveness. Guys were hustling and the game remained entertaining. 2020 saw one of the greatest All-Star games of the modern era, with the introduction of the Elam ending. Guys were putting their body on the line, taking charges, playing defense, getting blocks. This was everything that anyone wanted from an All-Star game. But just as they were heading in the right direction, their momentum got halted in its tracks, as the rest of the 2020s would see the fall-off of the All-Star game. In 2021, no one wanted to be there, and barely anyone was there. There were no fans in attendance due to the pandemic, and the game all of a sudden just didn't look like basketball anymore. This was supposed to be an event to entertain the fans, yet no fans were in attendance. So the players had essentially no incentive. This also saw the start of repeated regular logo threes in the middle of the All-Star game, meaning the game was just full of pretty much logo threes or uncontested, unoriginal dunks at the rim. Many mistakenly attributed this to the change in format. So in 2024, we returned to East versus West and saw the worst All-Star game yet. But just when you thought it hit rock bottom, we had the 2025 All-Star Games. The NBA opted for a 4-team tournament on All-Star Sunday with themed teams of the young stars, the OGs, the internationals, and the rising stars. They did not do a good job of roster selection as there was a ton of inconsistencies across the board. This is because these teams were artificially drafted rather than intentionally made to match the criteria that they laid out. Furthermore, you had 8 rookie sophomores playing, while guys like LaMelo Ball, Norman Powell, Luka, Sabonis, the list goes on, were sat at home. Bear in mind, LaMelo and Luka were amongst the top vote getters for this year's All-Star game, and yet they had to sit at home whilst rookies took their place. This format meant that you had someone like Lakers rookie, Hornets rookie, Lakers rookie, Dalton Connect playing 10 minutes in an All-Star game, whilst you have 28-year-old All-Star starter Jalen Brunson playing 5 minutes in the entire game for the young guys. Despite all of these inconsistencies, this All-Star weekend had a potential to be good because the players were trying harder. They came ready to compete and to put on the show. The likes of Wemby, Shea, Steph, Kyrie, Jaylen Brown, Dame. They all came ready, they all came with intensity, and if they had more than 10, 12 minutes combined on the floor, we could have seen a really entertaining game. I'm not exaggerating, we had about 30 minutes, maybe, of basketball, and about 2.5 hours of commercials, tributes, Kevin Hart in 2025, Mr. Beast on the screen for 6+ minutes. Why are these things happening in timeouts of an All-Star game? In their efforts to entertain by using entertainers outside of basketball, they forgot what basketball fans get entertained by the most. Basketball. You can say what you want about the format, but if the target score was higher and we had less interruptions, we actually could have had a good, entertaining tournament. This is the first year of the format, so I have to be optimistic and hope that all of these flaws that I'm pointing out get addressed and improved on in future years. What do you think needs to be done to save the All-Star game? Do we return to East versus West, or captains, or USA versus World? Do we stick with this format and refine it? Do we scrap the game altogether and do one-on-one tournaments? You tell me in the comments. Thanks for watching Oko TV. It's been real.
There's video evidence of my teammates basically saying we're not putting all our faith in the 18-year-old kid.
I don't think you can really just bring a high school player in and really just think your team gonna really turn around like that. You know what I'm saying? He can just hop on our bandwagon.
Gets it to LeBron for 3 for the win. Yes!